Hey everyone, welcome to lesson 8. What we're going to look at today is working with color in Illustrator. So we're going to take a look at a couple different things. We're going to look at color modes and what they control and kind of how that works with different types of mediums. We'll take a look at creating, editing, and applying colors using a couple different techniques. We'll name and save colors so we can reuse them. We'll copy and paste color attributes from one object to another. It's kind of a cool way of kind of quickly copying things. We're going to work with color groups. We're going to take a look at the color guide panel so that we can actually select one color and then create like a whole palette based off of it. We'll take a look at recoloring artwork and what that looks like, and then we'll look at working with live paint groups. So all of this week's lessons files are available on Blackboard. So if you jump into weekly assignments, here we are on lesson 8. We're going to be using this color to enhance signage. Here, if you download it, the lesson 8 files look like this. It's just lesson 8 start 1, a couple different artboards there, and then start 2 is kind of be something that we're going to kind of play around with a little bit as well. There's also an extension project this week. It's just more practice with the pen tool, so we'll take a look at that a little bit later once we're done with the main lesson itself. So what I'm going to do first is open up lesson 1 or lesson 8 start file 1, and it should look something like this. I'm just going to see a couple of artboards, and I want to just center them and get them nice and big on my screen so we can all see what I'm looking at here. Now, when we're talking about working with color, you'll notice that like with documents, there's 2 different main color modes. This one is Cmyk. The reason I can tell is I look right up here in the file name on the tab, and here if it says Cmyk Preview. Cmyk, what that means is that's cyan, magenta, yellow, black. Those are the colors of ink. So if you're looking at like your standard like desktop printer, there's 4 different color cartridges in there. That's the cyan, magenta, yellow ink. You design in those colors or in that color space, so you tend to get more true reproduction of color. Now the other color mode is RGB, which is short for red, green, blue, and that's when you're dealing with screens. So like if you're designing something for television, a mobile device, a website, that's the color mode you want to work in so that you're not getting any shifts in color with back and forth. Now, when you make a new document, that's where you're really going to see that. So here, the last project I was working on, I made a big like 8-foot by 4-foot sign that was going to go inside of a construction site. Because it was a printed piece, I was working in Cmyk, and notice the resolution goes to high, 300 pixels. That's usually a default for a print. But when I go into this color mode, notice I can also select RGB. RGB is something that when I'm working on RGB, that's where instead of working in like inches, I might be working in pixels. So you'll even see in your new document, there's some presets here. So like for your mobile devices or websites, these will all kind of default you right to RGB. Whereas if you go into print, I select one. Here I've got kind of different templates for different sizes of documents. The print is always going to default to Cmyk. So that's really the difference between those two and what you're going to want to pay attention to as you're working on documents. Now, what I want to take a look at is applying some existing colors. There's a couple places that we can get access to color from, and the first thing we're going to need to do is select an object in order to color it. So I'm going to click on this little snowboard here. Now, you see on the top right of my screen here, under my tool panels, I've got one for color. So I've got this color mixer. I've got this color guide, which is kind of cool. We'll take a look at that in a little bit. And then I've also got these swatches. Generally, when I'm working with kind of creating pieces, I tend to work in black and white or simple colors as I do the layout part. And then when I get into the actual color, that's where I'm going to really work with either a lot of swatches or maybe color panels or color mixers. Remember, I can also edit my color from my fill and stroke on my toolbar. So if I just double click in here, it brings in like a whole color picker. I can slide through the whole spectrum. And notice I've got all these numbers. So like I've got hue, saturation, brightness color model. I've got the RGB model. I've got the Cmyk model. And I've also got this little hashtag here. This is the hex model. This is for web. So you might see like a 6-digit or 6 number and letter code. That's short for these. So as you slide these things around, you'll see all these color mixes all change. So like if I'm looking at the Cmyk, the darker I go, usually the more K goes into it and the bigger the numbers go. Same thing when I'm looking at like my RGB. It usually works in the opposite direction. The numbers go smaller as I get darker and lighter as I go. And then with this, there's really no rhyme or reason to these. This is just more about finding a 6-digit code that equates to a color. So what I want to take a look at first is I want to just work with an existing color. And again, if I can do this from here, I can also pull open my properties panel. It's really whatever you're most comfortable with. I'm going to be working mostly today out of swatches and either double clicking here or just adding new swatches. Now notice from your swatches panel, there's a couple different things you're going to see. I've got this little library. So there's actually libraries of color. Here I've got all different swatch kinds. I can make groups. I can make new swatches from scratch and kind of build custom ones. But for this first one, I'm just going to grab an existing color. So what I'm going to do is, with this selected, I'm going to go up here. And this is basically just a shortcut to this panel. So say that I wanted to grab like this hot pink color and apply it onto my snowboard. I can just select right from the swatches panel and apply it right in there. Same thing here, like now I've got that, but I don't really like this green. Maybe I want to change this to orange on the stripe on the board. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to actually make a new custom color for this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, with this selected, I'm going to hit this little plus button. And what it does is it asks me, well, what kind of swatch do you want to make? What I want to do is I want to make a very specific color mix. Now, usually, most of the time, you're not going to be looking for specific number counts on these. You're just going to be kind of looking in a range and trying to kind of get things that get you closer to what you want to see. Occasionally, though, you will have a client that might have like a specific color that they're looking for, and you may see these values presented to you. So here, kind of have this like almost like this light peach color. And notice I can also give these things a name. This is kind of a terrible name. It's not very memorable, but if I call it peach, it might be a little bit easier to remember. Now, the other thing, I've got this global. So what global means is if it's not checked, I'll make it once, and once it applies to this, it's stuck. It'll never change again. Now, if I check this global box, what that means is that say I decide that I want to change this peach. Maybe I want to make it a little bit darker. Maybe I want to just add a little bit more magenta, kind of brighten it up a little, or kind of give it a little more warmth. What it'll do is it'll automatically update that across every instance of this color being used across this entire document. So this is kind of like a faster way of editing. If I don't check this global box and I decide I'm going to change my mind about the shade, I'm going to have to go every time I have it selected and go in and reselect and adjust it. So I like working global because then it's going to automatically update it through the entire document should I change something. So there's my peach. I warmed it up a little bit. I'm going to click OK. There it is. And now notice in my swatches panel, zoom in here, I've got this peach and I've got this little kind of chunk out of the corner. What that's doing is that's telling me that's a custom color and that it's a global color. Now, if I want to go back and change it, maybe I'm going to go in and click on other stuff and change things. If I double click on this peach, because this is a global color, say I wanted to make it really warm, if I click OK, it just automatically updated it right there. So when you're working on creating custom colors and saving them as a swatch, it's a really, really simple process. But again, it's just a couple of things that you want to pay attention to make sure that as you're working with it, you're ending up with the kind of color that you want. Now, what I want to do is I want to apply this to a couple different pieces. So now that I've got this custom color, let's go ahead and I'm going to shift click. I'm going to apply it to my text here. So here's my peach, and if I hover it, even says peach. So I like how it kind of matches and complements that. I think that looks good. If I want to edit any existing swatches that are non-global, like this one, if I select it, here it is. It's not a global swatch, so maybe I want to make it a little more red or maybe a little bit more dark. If I edit this thing, I can see it as the preview. But again, because it's not a global color, it's going to make me go back and change it on any instance that's used for it. So just kind of a couple, minor things, but that's really the difference between the one to the other. Now, what I want to take a look at is using a color picker to create some colors or select some colors. So now that we have that done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to take a look at this green. Now, this is just kind of a standard color, right? It's just in there. If I look, it's just one of these swatches that are selected. So I can see, like, as I click on pieces, if it's a color that's saved as a swatch, it highlights it or identifies it in here with a little white box around it. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to grab this purple or this green, and I want to shift this off to a purple. Now, I don't have a specific number. What I want to do is I just want to kind of take a look at different purples and get a feel for what'll look good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click inside the toolbar here, and here's my color picker. And what I want to do is I'm going to kind of scroll this along the side up to that purple range. And then I can kind of take a look at all these different shades. And maybe I want to try and get close to this, but maybe I want to go a little bit darker. It's going to automatically give me that mix. I'll click OK. I think it looks good. I actually like it better than this one. So now if I want to make this thing a new custom color, what I can actually do is just click up here and drag it right down. And now my custom color that I just made is saved as a swatch. So just by clicking here and dragging it into my swatches, it creates a saved swatch for me to reuse. If I double click on it, I can give it a name. I'm going to call this a deep purple. And I'll make sure it's a global swatch so that if I adjust it, it applies in different spots. So there we go. So I like that. Maybe let's take a look at this object here, and let's apply that purple to that. That's kind of nice. Almost like a nighttime kind of look. So here now, because it's a darker color, maybe I want to adjust it just a little bit. Maybe I want to put a little bit more blue into it. If I preview it, it's going to show me kind of how that's going to look. So maybe I go up with the cyan a little. Maybe I'll go up with the magenta just a tiny bit. And now it's got a little bit more of a bluish hue to it. I kind of like that nighttime look and how it complements into this graphic. And again, because I'm building something that's going to have multiple uses, I want to maintain some consistency across all my pieces. And that's really the idea of using these swatches. Here, if I'm building like a sticker, and this might be a complementary logo piece, and this is all part of one package, I want to maintain some kind of consistency with my color palettes. So now that we have that all taken care of, the next thing I want to take a look at is working with swatches out of libraries. And what a library is basically like a color matching system. So the reason these libraries exist is so that you can maintain color consistency from one piece to another. I might be designing this in Milwaukee and sending it off to a printer in California that's going to be installed on a truck and driven to Texas. I want to make sure that the purple that I have in my office in Milwaukee looks the same as the color that comes out of the printer in LA, and that ink stays the same and has the same shade when it's in the sun in Texas. That's what the idea of color books are. Color books are essentially going to give you consistent color across the board. So what this means is that here, if I take a look, I've got all these different models. What I'm going to take a look for is my Pantone Plus Solid Coated. Now what this does is it pops open a whole window, and it doesn't really look like much, and the colors aren't very fun, don't have very fun names, they're just numbered. But the idea behind these colors is that when this comes out of the printer, it's going to look exactly the same as the sample in my office as it does coming off their printer there. It's really a color consistency issue. So because these don't have fun or cute names, they're all just kind of numbers, I'm going to look for a very specific one. I'm going to look for 7562. So I click on it. It's going to automatically apply that anytime I select it. And notice I don't have anything selected here on my document. I just click on this and it places it right here as a saved swatch. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at applying that to this object right here. So I'm going to apply this kind of, and they look pretty close. Now, the thing about these is if I double click it, there's not a whole lot I can do with this thing. It's just a book color. I want to leave it as is, but what I can do is I can kind of play around with how the color mixing looks on this thing and kind of how it blends. So here I've got this, and it kind of looks like it's almost like a scarf. I'm going to grab these other two pieces above and below. I'm going to apply that same color, but I don't want them to be matching completely because then you can't see any differentiation with the illustration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to my color mixer, and notice here, now instead of having this as just one solid color, I've got a tint. So if I want to knock it down and do like a lighter version of it, maybe I'm going to set it to around 60%. Now when I click away, it's the same color, and there's a nice kind of harmony between the two. When you take a solid color and then you slide down the tinting of it, there's always kind of a nice blend to that. Now, because I'm happy with how this looks, but I want to make sure that these things are exactly the same from one to another, there's a real fast way of doing that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my color sample tool. It says eyedropper, and what I can do is I can select a color and it just fills it. Now, if I have an object selected, like say here, I can grab that color dropper and I can click on another object and it'll copy all those same attributes. So again, if I select like the inner part, I want to maybe make it that same dark purple here. Make sure I got the right one. Here, I'm going to make sure. For some reason, that's really weird, but it looks like it might be a tint issue. I'm going to grab that, and I'm just going to sample over to this here. Now, because this is that deep purple, if I wanted to maybe make a different version of this, because again, I can't make this one darker to match this one, what I can do is I can make a duplicate of a swatch by dragging it down onto that plus button. I'll make a second, so now this is deep purple too. And now maybe I want to turn up the darkness on this a little bit, bring up that K, that black, click OK, and then I can apply that onto there as well. Now that we got all this kind of taken care of as far as everything colored in, what I want to do is I want to take a look at creating a color group. So now how I've got all these different kind of pieces that I've built and I was kind of working with, what I can do is I can create a group that'll keep them all organized. So instead of kind of having to bounce around in here, if I click on this little folder button and create a new color group, I can give it a name. So I'll just call this snowboard. And then in here, what it's going to do is it's going to allow me to take all those different colors that I've created and drag them down into here. So now everything that I have, I can use this as a reference for quick coloring on any kind of future objects. Now, last thing I'll take a look at is working from the color guide. And this is kind of an interesting way of working. So like I made these all match. Now let's maybe try and do something a little bit different. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select this blue color. And I'm going to go in here into this color guide. If you're not seeing this, you can go to Window and then down to Color Guide, and it'll pop open that panel. Now, I have this blue selected. It's kind of like this tealish color. I'm going to double click on it. And what it does is it auto applies that in all different shades, that's kind of interesting. But if I click on this drop down here, it's going to show me all these different color models or all these different ways of applying that same color according to the various color models that you've probably covered in like Elements and Principles. So what I want to look for is, I think like this Analogous 2 model is cool. So I'm going to select it. And it doesn't really do me a whole lot of good in here. It's just kind of a way to preview it and look at all the tints. But if I click this little button here, what it'll do is it'll save this whole group right into my swatches panel. So now that group was just defined in here. So now maybe I want to change that color of that jacket and this interior. Maybe I'll go something like this. I don't know. I think maybe that one. Maybe if I want to go in and play around with like the helmet color and that interior line. Here, if I want to go with the outer bands of the goggles. And then here, if I want to play around with the tints on. So it's a real quick way of generating a color palette that's got a nice kind of blend or a nice harmony to it in a real fast way. So now we've kind of taken a look at all those different ways of working and editing and selecting color. I'm going to stop and save this thing. Again, make sure when you're saving these things for submission, you're saving them onto your desktop as PDFs. I'm just going to give it a last name, underscore description. I want to make sure I have it as a PDF, and I'm going to save it right back into my Lesson 8 folder. And what I want to do is I want to pull open that other lesson file. So let's take a look at that L8 Start 2. Now in this one, kind of looks a little interesting. You might recognize this from our prior lesson working with shapes. What we're going to take a look at is working with recoloring artwork. This is kind of like a fun way of playing. Now, I've got this object, and when I take a look at this snowboard here, like this thing's pretty complex. I got a bunch of different shapes that are all kind of built together to make this. And the color is kind of interesting. I don't mind what they did there, but what I want to do is I want to play around with recoloring it, but I want to take a look at recoloring it a little bit differently. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull open my Properties panel. And again, if you can't see that, you go to Window and down to Properties. And when I have this thing selected, and I'm actually going to grab the whole thing, it's going to show me all the different kind of appearance, fill, all that, all my different objects. If I expand down, what I'm going to be looking for is this Recolor button. So I'm going to click on this with the whole object selected. Now what it does is it takes a look at all the different colors that are built inside the selection. Now what I can do is I can start turning this, and it's going to use that same type of color, or that same model, that same blend, but I can drag in or drag out to recolor in any direction I want. Now the other way I can do this is something called the color theme picker. So you see how this, I've got this little button here. When I click on this thing, I get this little pointer, right? Now there's this picture here, and this is an actual photo. If I click on this photo, what it's going to do is it's going to generate, based on that photo, all the different colors, all the different tones, all the different shades. And then what I can do is drag these out Maybe I'm going to go a little bit darker with them. And I can drag them on any direction to get kind of more or less intensity. And then it's going to use that as almost like an inspiration for that color. The further I drag out, the more vivid it gets. The tighter I drag in, the kind of more drab it gets. But now it's allowing me to select colors based on that entire area. Now, the other way I could maybe do this is, instead of just working off of a single object or a photo, I could also grab it off existing art. So now, instead of just clicking once, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag. I'm going to drag through kind of a couple different chunks right here. And now it grabs the colors from that area. So maybe I want to do a bigger selection. And just like before, I can control how bright or how dark it is. And it's going to use that as the model. And now if I move this slider over, like what I want to be more prominent, what I want less of, maybe I want to grab like a different piece of it. But again, I'm just clicking and dragging to grab those sections of color, and then I can adjust from within here. So that's really the idea of working with that. Now, once you're done with these things, again, I've got like my prominent colors here. Once I'm done with this, I can reset this back to the original if I want. I'm never stuck with it, but when I'm done, all I need to do is click away, and then it'll apply those colors to it. Or if you're not going to want to work with those, it's the same basic idea. You can just click out. Now, what I want to take a look at last is, if we scroll down here, we've got a second panel, and what I want to take a look at is something called live painting. Live painting is a way that you can kind of quickly color in lots of areas using kind of a single command. And we're going to work with, as we do this, we're going to work with a short keyboard shortcut. We're going to be doing left and right arrows. So what I want to take a look at first is take a look at my color swatches. And I've got this snowboard one that I created before. So what I want to do is I first want to click and drag to select the whole object. And once I have the object selected, what I want to do is I want to make this thing into a live paint group. So I'm going to go up to Object, Live Paint, and Make. And now I know it's a live paint group. I'm going to select the color range. And then what I want to look for is my live paint bucket. So your live paint bucket, if you're not seeing it, remember, you can always go in your toolbar and you've got all these different paints. This is the live paint bucket. It's hidden underneath your shape builder tool. So now what I can do is, with this bucket, when I hover over the object, it shows me these little color swatches. So what I can do is I can tap to the left or the right, and it cycles through this. So maybe I want to go through and do every other that. I can quick swap out to my orange, and maybe I'm going to do that. Maybe I'm going to do my light yellow. So what it's going to let me do is quick select through all these different colors and apply that one at a time. Now, the advantage using live paint is, otherwise I got to go into this group and I have to select the object one at a time, select the color. So really what it's going to let you do is, if you know you're working with one of these color groups, it's going to let you go through and color them a lot more quickly than if you were going to select one object at a time and play around with that. So that's really the idea with color. Again, you're not doing a whole ton with this one, so I'm not super concerned about you saving and sending over this one. But if you do want to send over just that start file, just to show me that you've kind of walked through the steps on this, that'll take care of lesson 8 in working with color. And again, nothing super earth-shattering. It's really just getting you a little more familiar with swatches, saving and customizing color, and also, really importantly, working with this color guide, being able to generate really nice color palettes really quickly based off of selected colors. So you could save those and send those to me as an email. And for the extension project this week, take a look. I have Tracing Practice Part 2. So it's going to be just kind of more of the same. There's never enough practice when it comes to working with the pen tool. You'll see as you're looking at these, obviously we've got a little bit of a theme here. We're going with kind of some basketball logos. Again, when you're thinking about your tracing process, you always want to think first, where does it start? Where does it end? And as you're working, making sure that using as few points as possible. So as I'm tracing, remember, I want to make sure that my fill color is set to none. So I'm going to set my fill to none. And I like to set my stroke color to something nice and bright, usually like a magenta-ish kind of color. And I'm trying to do as few as possible. And I'm not worrying about getting it perfect on the first shot. I just want to get a basic trace through. And then once I have the basic object traced out, I'm going to come back in with my direct selection tool. and clean up my edges. So I think that's pretty good. But again, obviously I'm off in a few spots, so I can kind of pull away points. I can grab those handlebars and adjust. And the other thing you want to think about is as you're doing these things, don't be afraid to zoom way in, especially when you're going in and getting the details. That's going to be really helpful in fine-tuning your illustration. So here, if I need to like bring this in a little bit, let's get much closer. The other thing I like to think about as I'm doing these is to kind of work smarter and not harder. If I'm doing something like this, rather than trying to trace a perfect circle, a tool exists for that. Use your Eclipse tool. And once you get a basic one drawn in, make sure I hold my Shift key. Now, one thing you might want to consider, especially in something like this, is what you've already learned. So here, it looks like this is almost like a perfect circle in a perfect circle, but with that other box shape attached to it. So here, rather than just tracing that out, what I could do is build this shape. And then remember how we can kind of do some path finding. And so now that we have that, let's go in our shape builder and then make sure everything's selected. So both shapes are selected. And I can shape build out and convert that into one piece. Nice and easy. So once you're done with your tracing, you're going to select your objects, shift them over, make this a group, slide them over to the side, and then I'll fill and stroke them. So when you're done with all these, you're going to make sure you stop, save these, and again, that'll be the second part of tracing that'll be completed and submitted along with your other assignment. So that'll take care of lesson 8. The next session, we're going to jump into something a little bit different. We're going to take a look at a little bit of typography stuff. So really like working with text on paths, on curves, kind of customizing things a little bit. And that'll be our next lesson, and I'll see you then for that.